to another history podcast. Today we are reading, actually, it's from an anthropology book, but there's history in it. So we will learn a lot. So there's an introduction where the author, Dr. Ehud Halperin, meets like the Gur, who is the transmitter of the Devta Devi spirits. They're kind of like shamans in the Himachal Pradesh region. Tule Ram. Tule Ram was the son or some descendant of this like ancestral lineage, and he was chosen after a 10-year gap in this line of gurs. So it is a very spontaneous system, and they don't have like centralized people controlling who's who. So it's like different from the Tulku Tibetan Buddhist tradition. Like every city or town in Himachal Pradesh basically have their own customs for doing so. So that's why the democracy there is also pretty strong. So the history part, the author starts with actually the traveler from China, Xuanzang. So Xuanzang has accounts of Kullu, where Mahadimba, the spirit goddess, demon goddess, is based. And at that time, Kullu was called Kuluta, and they formed alliances with Tibet, Ladakh, and Lahul Spiti and surrounding regions. It's a very dynamic situation, fluid situation. And then there was the Pal dynasty, then the Singh dynasty. Of the rulers who came after Sid Singh, several are worth mentioning. His son, Bahadur Singh, who ruled during the 16th century, expanded the kingdom considerably and built the famous temple to the goddess Harimba in the village of Dungri. Jagat Singh shifted the capital to Sultanpur, the present-day town of Kullu, in the 17th century, introduced the worship of Raghunathji, Lord Rama, in the valley, and inaugurated the famous Dashera festival that is still celebrated here annually. Jagat Singh also received several official letters issued by the Mughal court, 12 under Dara Shikoh and 1 from Aurangzeb. By the end of the 18th century, the Gurkhas of Nepal had taken hold of several neighboring regions, and the Kulu kings had to pay them tribute. In the early 19th century, Sikh forces advanced into Kullu and also demanded tribute. They later plundered Sultanpur and made the king pay an even larger sum to free the country. The defeat of the Gurkhas by the British in 1815 marked the beginning of colonial rule over much of West Himalaya. After defeating the Sikh armies in 1846, the British took over the Kullu district as well. An assistant commissioner, subordinate to the deputy commissioner in Kangra, established his headquarters in the old castle in Nagar that was built by Sid Singh in the 16th century. Thakur Singh, the Raja of Kullu at the time, reigned 1841 to 1852, retained his title and was allowed to exercise sovereign powers within his Jagir, but upon his death in 1856, his son was denied these privileges on the pretense that he was the son of a household maid. His title was lowered to that of Rai, and his sovereign powers were drastically slashed. The British assistant commissioners enjoy the powers of revenue collectors, and it was under them that several new revenue settlements were made. Within new settlements, the fields were demarcated and measured, field maps were drawn up, and accurate land records prepared with a copy supplied to each landholder. Much of the knowledge we now have of the Kullu Valley was produced by these assistant commissioners, who wrote books and gazetteers on the region. Other producers of knowledge were British travelers such as William Moorcroft and George Trebeck, John Calvert, and Charles G. Bruce, several of whom came to the region in hope of hunting bear, for which the Kullu Valley was known at the time. Balu, they call it Balu. You can also find references to this in anthropologists' works. I will link them down below. Alexander Cunningham, a British Army officer and archaeologist who founded the Archaeological Survey of India in 1861 and became its first director, also traveled in Kullu and published his findings in an early journal article. After independence, the Punjab government abolished what remained of Kullu Raja's power and made it a subdivision of Kangra district until 1963. In 1966, it was merged with the Himachal Pradesh Union Territory, which later became a state in 1971. Yet, as noted above, the oldest male of the royal family, Maheshwar Singh, is still referred to as a Raja and sometimes attends the festivals as the Raja. And then we move on to the section about how Buddhism faded and Brahmanization happened. It seems that Buddhism had some presence in Kullu in the first millennium CE, when Xuanzang, the Chinese pilgrim mentioned above, notes the famous emperor Ashoka built a Buddhist stupa in the middle of the valley. While the stupa is no longer to be found, the information in other sources led Hutchinson and Vogel to conclude that it would thus appear that Buddhism once flourished in Kullu, though it has now practically disappeared from the valley. Other traces of Buddhism, mostly of its Tibetan branch, can still be found on the northern side of the Rotang Pass, in the valleys of Lahore and Spiti, where a considerable section of the population follows this religion. Other faiths, possibly of tribal origin, have left more evident traces. In fact, the worship of ancient divinities such as Nagas, snakes, or snake deity, more accurately, Narayans, rain-bestowing deities, Naginis, female serpent deities, and Yoginis, female, often demonic forest spirits, is widespread in the region. Scholars argue that throughout history, many such local deities underwent a process of Brahmanization in which they were identified with and gradually absorbed into figures of the pan-Indian pantheon. This process explains the large number of rishis, the holy sages and seers of Vedic times, who are worshipped in the region. From earliest times, the remote Himalayan region was perceived as a perfect home for sages and wandering ascetics who came here for contemplation and meditation. In the process of the Brahmanic assimilation of local deities, it made sense to equate local divinities with ancient seers. A crucial moment in the history of Kullu came about in the 17th century. According to the story, Jagat Singh, the president king at the time, caused the death of a Brahmin in a failed attempt to take valuable pearls that the Brahmin allegedly possessed. Following the event, Singh was cursed. Any food that was served to him became infested with worms, and any beverage turned into blood. In order to lift the curse, Singh was advised to bring the statue of Raghunathji from Awadh and install him as the patron deity of the royal dynasty and the presiding deity of the valley. Once Jagat Singh did so, the curse was indeed lifted. I think the Limitless podcast talks about this when they interviewed the guy from Kullu. I forgot his name. But yeah, he also wore a hat like this in the interview. Kullu's Dasahara festival was inaugurated at that time to celebrate the arrival of Raghunathji and to establish his supremacy over the other deities of the valley. Jagat Singh is thus considered the one who introduced Vaishnavism to the Kullu Valley. It should be noted throughout the book, I use several terms interchangeably: indigenous, local, tribal, peripheral, to refer to streams of Hinduism that are removed from the mainstream Brahmanic and Sanskritic forms to varying degrees. As we will see, forms of Desi Hinduism is still undergoing Brahmanization processes, albeit not without difficulties. The influence of external ideas and powers on the Kullu Valley seems to have increased dramatically in recent times. In the past few decades, the area has witnessed far-reaching transformations and life has changed. Already in the 1950s, Y.S. Parmar, who would later become the first chief minister of Himachal Pradesh, identified the state's relative isolation as the root cause of economic problems. He allocated more than 50% of the annual budget to the development of roads and communication efforts. His efforts gained support from Central Indian government following the Chinese incursion into the eastern Himalayas in 1962. Officials realized the pressing strategic need for reliable road systems in this border region. So only 200 kilometers were navigable roads in 1948. By 2005, the department in charge reported over 23,000 kilometers of roadway in the region. The expanding infrastructure significantly eased the flow of goods in and out of the region and eventually led to agrarian paradigm shifts across the state. Residents of this area lived off agriculture, horticulture, animal husbandry, pastoralism, and the extraction of resources from the forests. With the new infrastructure, farmers shifted from subsistence to commercial agriculture, substituting traditional crops with new, more marketable ones such as cherries, almonds, and plums. Apples, which had been popularized in the region in 1904 by the missionary named Samuel Stokes, soon became the most important commercial fruit grown in Himachal Pradesh and account for almost 90% of the total food production in the state. In Kullu Valley, where conditions are favorable, apple cultivation has become the icon of the horticultural revolution. The shift to cash crops introduced a capitalist economy to the region. Accumulation of wealth became easier. Opportunities opened up for small-scale farmers. The local economy was integrated into the rest of the country, and goods began to flow in as well. The Kullu Valley has elderly residents who still remember a time when there were no tomatoes to be found. Onions were sold by traveling merchants only once or twice a year, and salt was brought from Mandi, a 3-day walk away. But nowadays, the town receives supplies regularly from Punjab, and the market Manali offers lettuce, ground coffee from France, and tahini from Saudi Arabia, as well as smartphones, flash drives, and flat screen TVs. The horticultural revolution is only one aspect of the economic upheaval that has taken Himachal Pradesh in recent decades. The state's government, realizing the huge touristic potential of the region, has invested significantly in promoting this industry. The simultaneous decline of tourism in Kashmir caused by disturbances in that region has also contributed to the steady influx of tourists. The Kullu Valley has become one of Himachal Pradesh's most highly prized tourist destinations, and the town of Manali has become the state's most touristic town. While many of Manali's surrounding villages benefited from the tourist boom, the residents of Old Manali village, where I resided during my field research, were particularly successful. Since the late 1990s, the village has turned into a thriving hub for backpackers, boasting dozens of guest house, restaurants, clothing and souvenir shops, internet cafes, travel agencies, and other tourist services. Many in the village have given up agriculture altogether and tapped into the tourism market. Houses were converted into guest houses, restaurants emerged on agricultural plots, and empty spaces were rented for makeshift shops and cafes. Some became ski instructors during the snowy winter season, which is now. The introduction of roads, tourists, wealth, and later on new technologies and media was accompanied by new ideas, desires, and modes of behavior that have changed life in the region. Capitalist modernity has thus become popular in a short span of time. Mountain scenery, traffic jams, digital technology, and money all come together here in the Kullu Valley. This is the end of the first chapter of the book called The Many Faces of a Himalayan Goddess. And if you are interested, you can search for her bhajans online. They are very beautiful, and it also helps the people of Kullu Manali. Thanks for watching. Take care.